The Fleche Wallonne in cycling is for experts a boring competition, with always the same finish at the Mur de Huy and very few candidates for the final victory, as was seen in the 2022 edition. However, in a race like this there will always be moments that are one in a million. Moments full of emotion, doping and smiles that will blow your mind. Do you want to hear about a few of them? Well, without further ado, let this show begin. Winning so doped up that you even test positive in the post-race controls. Typically the riders have always been well ahead of the anti-doping controls, with new drugs, methods or undetectable substances. But in the 1977 edition of the Fleche Wallonne, the controls were actually ahead of the riders, and that includes the winner, one of the biggest dopers in history, the Belgian Freddy Maertens. At the time, Freddy was the world champion, and that same year he would win the Paris-Nice, the Tour of Catalonia, 7 stages in the Giro d'Italia, and most especially the Vuelta a España with 13 stages in the Spanish round. He won the Fleche Wallonne solo when the Mur de Huy was not yet included on the parcours, and that same season he tested positive in the Tour de France, the Tour of Belgium and the Tour of Flanders due to his spectacular cocktail of amphetamines and cortisone. As an interesting side fact, the final winner was no less doped, Francesco Moser, second classified that day, and also there was Eddy Merckx who came 8th, and he was also disqualified for doping. No doubt, the Rat Race movie was not very different from real life, right? The magical years of Giorgio Furlan. One of the most characteristic riders of the epocha is undoubtedly the Italian Giorgio Furlan. Always under the care of such prestigious doctors as Luigi Cecchini or Michele Ferrari, and who between 1992 and 1994 flew so high that he was never spoken of again. In 1992 he went from not finishing in the top 100 to finishing 19th in the Giro d'Italia, including a stage victory, as well as winning the Tour of Switzerland and, of course, the Fleche Wallonne. A competition that he won under torrential rain and again in a breakaway, and one that was formed in principle to support his teammate Moreno Argentin. He was in that break along with his teammate Davide Cassani, the Russian and the future US postal rider Vyacheslav Ekimov, and the former Tour de France champion Pedro Delgado. But despite the Spaniards' attacks, on the arrival at the Mur de Huy, Furlan left them all completely stranded, and he achieved a victory with a brutal efficiency against his rivals. The third classified on that day was his teammate Cassani, so a good team performance, but one that 2 years later would be absolutely smashed. Michele Ferrari's Magic Trio. 1994, the Fleche Wallonne. Such a mythical and well-known performance that we don't need to go into it in too much detail here. Basically, on the first pass over the Mur de Huy, 3 members of the same team escaped, leaving everyone else stranded, like chewing gum underneath the school desk. In that trio was none other than the aforementioned Giorgio Furlan in his Trombolico year. Along with him was the former double winner Moreno Argentin at the tender age of 34. And completing the trio was the Russian biscuit of only 24 years of age, Yevgeny Berzin, who would go on to win in less than a month the Giro d'Italia and the Liège-Bastogne-Liège. The 3 members of Dr. Michele Ferrari's Giwis Balan team shared the burden and took turns with one another and began to lead the peloton by more than 1.5 minutes. In the end, they shared the spoils by taking into account experience within the team, with the veteran Argentin winning ahead of Furlan and Berzin. As a by the way, a little mentioned fact that indicates who dominated performance medicine in the darkest parts of the 90s is that in this Fleche Wallonne, 8 of the top 10 were Italian, and 9 of the top 10 competed in Italian teams. Poor Lance Armstrong couldn't believe it, but the sons of Ferrari always get their chance. When Lance Armstrong was not winning the Tour de France, 1996, 4 months before he was diagnosed with a serious illness, former world champion Lance Armstrong was in his prime as a professional cyclist. At the age of 25 he was already a world champion, and thanks to his contacts with Dr. Michele Ferrari, he was becoming one of the best classicists on the planet. An example of his enormous potential was in the Fleche Wallonne, when he escaped with the likes of Gabriele Colombo, the current Pogacar sports director Mauro Gianetti, Alexander Gonchenkov, and the future Festina Frenchman Didier Roux. And it was with Roux who he managed to escape in the final kilometres after a powerful attack on the flat. In those days, when the whole bunch of riders did not reach the foot of the Mer de Huy together, La Lanza took advantage of the hardest ramps of the legendary climb to leave the future Festina doped rider stranded like another piece of chewing gum. And he went on to win the Fleche Wallonne like a true champion. As he himself confessed to his doctors months later, he could never have done it without his cocktail of EPO and growth hormones. Undoubtedly the true Terminator of cycling. The little children of Rodolphe Massy. We have already spoken on the channel about how the French team Casino, which would later become the well-known AG Tour squad, had an absolutely epic 1998 season. That was when they had the doping substance trafficker Rodolphe Massy on the rider roll, and who would have finished King of the Mountains and in the top 10 of the Tour de France that year if it had not been for a police raid. That season, the Casino team won a truckload of races, despite having a team that was full of old men harking back to past glories and low-level dopers. One of those was Bo Hamburger, a typical Dane from the days of Bjarne Riis, who tested positive for doping as many as 3 times during his career with all kinds of products, from EPO to cortisone to salbutamol. In that epic year at the Casino team, Italian veteran and Massy teammate Alberto Elli had broken away at the front, and he ploughed on there along with 2 other rivals. But they were caught by another small group with 1 kilometre to go. Just past the Flamme Rouge, another Casino man, Mr. Bo Hamburger himself, attacked as if the ghost of Marilyn Monroe was waiting for him at the finish line. It didn't even matter if the doped Belgian Frank Vandenbroek came up from behind with all his might, because Casino had time to celebrate his victory at the finish line in a ridiculous manner. Oh, and the third classified finisher was the former escapee and his teammate Alberto Elli. And all this ahead of riders like Michele Bartoli and Luc Leblanc. Epic. Julian Alaphilippe's final prize. For the last 19 seasons, the finish of the Fleche Wallonne has always been the same. A goat hill of Huy where many riders arrive, and one of them, usually Alejandro Valverde Belmonte, David Rebellin or Julian Alaphilippe, ends up winning over the others, and this always by taking advantage of their sprinting skills on the hill. It was exactly the Frenchman's last victory in 2021 that was the most legendary of all. Not only because he won ahead of another specialist, Primož Roglič, but also because it was his best victory wearing the World Champions jersey, just as the doped Freddy Maertens had done 44 years earlier. However, he did not confess to doping to win in Huy, although he did have a great time with his girlfriend Marianne Rousse after finishing the classic, something he himself considered a blue hell, as he jocularly declared in front of the Cycling Stories cameras. A more than deserved award for Lulu, and one that represents all the magic that this competition has for all cyclists in the international peloton. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as we did making it. We'll see you in the next one.